For nearly 80 years, my life has moved in rhythm with the seasons, each one bringing its own kind of bloom. I had always imagined that I would spend my final years in quiet contentment, with my only son Michael, the one true hope of my life. This house, the one I'm in now, is the place I built over a lifetime. Every single brick, every tree in the small garden, is soaked through with my sweat and my memories. I truly believed this would be my final resting place, a peaceful haven where I could live out my old age watching my grandchildren grow and play in the yard. But fate, it seems, had a different path for me, one that led to a bitter memory that still squeezes my heart tight whenever I dare to recall it. It all began on a rainy afternoon in late fall. The ache in my lower back, a complaint I had ignored for years, suddenly flared with a viciousness I had never known. This was no longer the simple, dull pain of getting older. This was a sharp, stabbing feeling, like 1,000 tiny needles piercing every corner of my body. I tried to endure it. I told myself it was just the change in the weather, or perhaps I had overdone it with the gardening. But my body slowly began to fail me. My appetite vanished, and every morning when I woke, I felt as if I were recovering from a long, serious illness. A profound weariness settled deep in my bones. My son, Michael, is the boy to whom I devoted my entire youth, my entire life. From the moment he was born, he has grown into a fine, successful man now. His wife, my daughter-in-law Sarah, is a young and beautiful woman, always impeccably polite, always composed and graceful in her manner. I once cared for her a great deal, believing she was a good wife and a wonderful daughter-in-law who would bring a special kind of warmth and light into our family. When the pain finally became more than I could bear, I had no choice but to ask Michael to take me to the hospital. On the way there, I tried to keep a calm face, but a vague and heavy sense of dread was growing inside me. It was a fear that something was truly wrong, a premonition that I was about to face an illness unlike any I had ever encountered before. After a long series of tests, the meeting with the doctor took place in a room that felt heavy and airless. I can still clearly see the doctor's sad eyes and remember the words he seemed so reluctant to speak. "Ma'am, your condition is quite serious," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "This is a difficult disease to treat. We will, of course, do everything we can for you." The terrible disease was cancer. The word itself felt like a death sentence hanging right over my head, suffocating all my hope, choking off all the trust I had placed in life. I turned to look at my son and my daughter-in-law, desperate for a shared glance, for a comforting hand to hold. But all I received in that sterile, quiet room was a cold and profound silence. Michael just stared down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Sarah let out a soft sigh, and when she did look at me, it was with a gaze of pure, chilling indifference. After that fateful diagnosis, my life seemed to fall into a deep, unending darkness. The long days in the hospital began, filled with rounds of chemotherapy and radiation that left me exhausted and in constant pain. My hair fell out in clumps, and my body grew thin and frail, my skin pale and translucent. I would lie in my hospital bed for hours, staring out the window at the brilliant sunshine, yet inside my heart, it was an eternal winter. Michael and Sarah came to visit a few times in the beginning, but soon the visits grew shorter and farther apart. Eventually, they stopped coming altogether, replaced by brief, formal phone calls. "Hi, Mom, how are you feeling? What did the doctor say?" Michael's voice on the other end of the line sounded so distant, as if he were speaking to a casual acquaintance, not to the mother who had given him life and raised him with all the love she had. I had never felt so utterly alone. The physical pain, as terrible as it was nothing compared to the spiritual agony of being abandoned by the people I loved most in the world. I asked myself over and over, had I become nothing more than a burden to them because of this awful disease? Did all the love, all the sacrifices I had made for them over the years, truly mean nothing at all? One afternoon, as I was lying in my bed, Michael and Sarah appeared in the doorway. A tiny flicker of hope sparked within me. I prayed they would stay for a little while, that we could talk like we used to. But it was not to be. They just stood there by the foot of my bed, looking at me with those same detached, distant eyes. Then Sarah spoke, her voice clear and cold. "Mom," she said, "we think it would be better for you to move into a nursing home. There are plenty of nurses and doctors there. It would be a much better environment for you." Her words felt like a knife plunging straight into my heart. A nursing home? I had never, not for one moment, imagined living in such a place. I wanted to be in my own home, surrounded by my children and grandchildren. I looked at Michael, pleading with my eyes for him to object, to defend me. But he just stood there in silence, his head bowed as if in agreement with his wife. "I don't want to go," I tried to say, but my voice was a hoarse whisper, and tears began to well up in my eyes, blurring their faces. Sarah's expression remained cold, unmoved. "Mom, this is for your own good," she insisted. "We're both so busy with work, and we can't give you the care you need. You'll be looked after much more properly in a home." The words sounded so reasonable on the surface, but underneath? They were coated in a layer of indifference and cruelty that stole the very air from my lungs. They were full of it. They wanted me out. They wanted to erase me from their lives, to push me out of this very house that I had spent my entire life building. But the agony did not stop there. The worst of it was yet to come. A few days later, as I lay dazed and numb in my hospital bed, my son, Michael, came to visit. He looked tired, and his face was a mask of annoyance. He sat down on the chair beside my bed, but he didn't reach for my hand. He didn't ask how I was feeling or what the doctors had said that day. Instead, he simply held out a single piece of paper. "Mom, I need you to sign this." I squinted, trying to focus my weary eyes on the document. I could make out the legal language, the formal print. It was a deed transfer. I had always intended to leave this house to my son, of course, but in the future, as his inheritance. And now, here he was, asking me to sign it over to him while I was lying on my sickbed, weak, vulnerable, and heartbroken. "What is this? What do you want me to sign?" I tried to ask, but my voice came out as a trembling whisper. Michael let out a heavy sigh, a sound thick with irritation. "Just sign it, Mom. Please. There are things I need to take care of. You don't have a family anymore, so what's the point of you holding on to the house? The doctor even said your illness is." His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. "You don't have a family anymore." That single phrase pierced my heart, inflicting a wound so deep that no medicine on earth could ever heal it. I have no family? I, who had built this family from nothing? I, who had dedicated my entire existence to raising him, to giving him a life I never had? And now he, my own son, was telling me I had no family. All those years of struggle, raising him all by myself, all the tears I had shed in private, all the meals I had skipped so that he could eat his fill, all of it, every single sacrifice, had just been rendered meaningless. He no longer saw me as his mother. In his eyes, I was nothing more than a burden. I was a dying patient, a useless old woman with no value left in the world. His only thought was of how to get rid of me quickly, how to take what little I had left for himself. I couldn't say a word. I had no words left. Tears just began to stream down my face, hot and silent, a river of sorrow I couldn't stop. I turned my head to face the cold, blank wall, unable to bear looking at the face of the son who had so completely betrayed me. My trust, my love, my entire world had been shattered into a million tiny pieces. I had lost everything. I had no family, no child, no hope. There was only me, alone, facing a terrible disease and an even more terrible loneliness. But then, deep within my soul, a tiny spark of anger began to glow. A thought, weak at first but growing stronger by the second, surfaced in my mind. I will not be broken. I will not let them achieve their goals so easily. With what little strength I have left, I must find a way to get my own justice. I will show them. I will show them that I am not some weak, senile old woman who can be so easily tricked and discarded. That night, I could not sleep. The physical pain from my illness and the emotional agony of betrayal swirled together, tormenting me without end. I just lay there, staring up at the sterile white ceiling of my room, and a plan began to take root in my mind. A plan that would change everything. After that sleepless night, haunted by the memory of my son's heart-shattering words, "You don't have a family anymore?" and a body racked with pain. A cold and stubborn resolve began to bloom inside me. I was not going to die quietly. I would not let them bury me under the weight of their greed and their indifference. Weak as I was, a plan began to take shape in the mind of a mother who would not be broken. The pieces started to come together, slowly but surely. I stayed in the hospital for several more days, and I began to play a part. I acted the role of the frail, fading patient, pretending to be barely conscious most of the time. I would feign a deep sleep, or I would mutter nonsensical words whenever someone came near my bed. Seeing me this way, my son and daughter-in-law became convinced that I had lost all my fight, that it was only a matter of time before they could move me into a nursing home and be done with me. They stopped visiting as often, their presence reduced to a few perfunctory phone calls to check on my status. I would answer with a weak yes or oh, my voice barely a whisper. Then, after a week of this, I did something they didn't expect. I demanded to be discharged. The doctor was hesitant at first, but I was firm. "I want to go home," I insisted. "Whatever happens, I want to spend my last days in my own house." Michael seemed confused by my sudden resolve, but Sarah was openly delighted. She must have thought that I was so weak, so broken, that getting me home would only make it easier for them to manage things. They arranged for a car service, and on a pale, sun-drenched afternoon, I returned to the familiar lines of my own house. Home? No, I hesitated to even call it that anymore. The structure stood there, solid and proud, but the feeling of belonging was gone. The moment I stepped through the door, I sensed a foreign presence in the air. The familiar, comforting scent of old wood and the jasmine from my garden had been replaced by something else, the sharp, slightly abrasive smell of bleach and the heavy perfume that Sarah always wore. This was no longer my space. It was a territory that had been claimed. I kept my face looking tired and drawn. I walked slowly, shuffling my feet, letting out soft sighs like a frail old woman would. Sarah immediately instructed the housekeeper to help me to my old room. "Mom, you just take it easy and get some rest. We'll handle everything around the house, okay?" Her voice was coated in a syrupy sweetness, but underneath it, I could feel the sharp edge of her intent. It was an attempt to dominate me, a subtle announcement that I was no longer the mistress of this domain. I simply gave a slow, gentle nod, saying nothing at all. When I was back in my room, I let my body fall onto the bed. The familiar softness of the mattress, a small comfort in a world that had become so hostile. My room, at first glance, was just as I had left it. The same antique cherrywood dressers stood against the wall. The same faded floral curtains framed the window overlooking the garden. But I knew better. The greatest change wasn't something you could see, it was something you could feel, a subtle shift in the very air, a wrongness in the way things were arranged. I pulled open the doors to my closet, and my heart sank. Tucked in between my sensible wool coats and simple cotton dresses were several new garments I'd never seen before. They were blouses made of cheap, synthetic fabrics in garishly bright colors, dresses with hemlines far too short for a woman my age. They were Sarah's taste, not mine. On top of my vanity, where my simple silver-backed brush and comb set usually lay, a few pieces of loud, flashy costume jewelry were scattered about, catching the light with a cheap sparkle. These were small incursions, tiny flags planted on conquered territory, but they were more than enough to confirm my fears. My daughter-in-law was already beginning her takeover of my personal space, even while I was still here to witness it. Over the next several days, I committed myself fully to my new role. I became the feeble, confused old woman they wanted me to be. I pretended to have a poor appetite, pushing food around my plate at dinner and eating only a few small bites. I would often doze off in my armchair in the living room, my head lolling to one side, or spend long, empty hours just staring out at the garden with a vacant expression on my face. Sarah seemed positively thrilled with my performance. She grew bolder, the caution she once showed around me melting away completely. She began to complain freely in front of me, sighing about the cost of my medications or the inconvenience of my presence. Sometimes, she would issue sharp commands to the housekeeper right in front of me, not even bothering to lower her voice or acknowledge that I was in the room at all. Meanwhile, my son, Michael, seemed to be falling deeper under his wife's spell. He hardly ever spoke to me anymore, and on the rare occasions that he did, his tone was clipped and indifferent, his eyes focused on his phone or the television. I could feel the chasm between us widening with each passing day, a cold, empty space growing where the warmth of a mother and son's love used to be. The pain of it was like having salt rubbed into an open wound, a constant, stinging ache in my chest. But I buried it deep inside, forcing my face to remain a placid, emotionless mask. I began to pay meticulous attention to the smallest details. I watched Sarah take hushed, secretive phone calls in the corner of the den, her voice a low murmur, but her face alight with an unmistakable excitement. I noticed how she would leave the house carrying a large, expensive-looking handbag and return hours later humming to herself, a triumphant little smile playing on her lips. I also became aware of unfamiliar workmen coming and going from the house. Several times a week, they carried toolboxes and rolls of blueprints, and Sarah would often meet them at the door herself, directing them down to the basement or the guest rooms on the lower level. I suspected they were making renovations, changing my house from the inside out, all without my knowledge or consent. One afternoon, I was pretending to sleep in my armchair when I, accidentally, overheard a conversation between Sarah and Michael in the living room. Sarah's voice was practically vibrating with excitement. "Honey, that contract is almost finalized. As soon as that person." She paused for a fraction of a second. Then her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. But my hearing, sharpened by necessity, caught every single word clearly. "Is gone, everything will fall right into place. Then this house, all of it, will be completely ours. No more worries, no more complications." Michael didn't object. He didn't even question her. I just heard him give a little chuckle, a soft, dismissive sound that was, to my ears, the most despicable and grating noise I had ever heard. A laugh of complicity. They were discussing my death. They were openly planning to seize my home right under my nose, behind my back. They had absolutely no idea that the weak, confused old mother they thought was fading away had heard every single one of their venomous, cruel words. A cold, hard rage began to build inside me, a fire in the pit of my stomach. They weren't just abandoning me to my illness, they were actively plotting to steal my entire legacy while I was still breathing. Their bottomless greed, their utter lack of conscience, was staggering. It was in that moment that I knew my plan to feign senility was not just a good idea, it was absolutely essential. I needed more time. I needed to gather undeniable proof to expose them for the monsters they truly were. From that moment on, every one of my senses became honed to a razor's edge. I started to wander around the house more frequently, my shuffling steps carrying me to just the right places to accidentally overhear more conversations. I paid closer attention than ever before, noting every whispered phone call, every surreptitious glance between my son and his wife. All the while, I never let my mask slip. I maintained the vacant stare, the foolish, slack-jawed expression of a sick old woman who had lost her grip on reality. And then, I began to prepare. I forced my mind back through the years, recalling the secret places inside this house where I had stored my most valuable possessions, places that only I knew. Underneath the loose floorboard beneath my bed, there was an old wooden chest. Inside, I kept my bank passbooks, the deed to the house, stock certificates, and precious mementos of my late husband, his wedding ring, his military service medals. I had to make sure they were still safe, that Sarah hadn't already discovered them. I also began to formulate a new plan. I went online and ordered several tiny, discreet security cameras. I would install them in the main living areas, recording their every move, their every word. I wanted more than just my own testimony. I wanted irrefutable, visual proof of their treachery. At night, long after Michael and Sarah had gone to bed and the house had fallen into a deep silence, I would carefully, quietly pull myself out of bed. The room would be cloaked in darkness, with only a sliver of pale moonlight filtering through the gap under the door. I would stand there in the dark and gently touch the deep wrinkles on my face, feeling the persistent ache in my bones and the profound weariness that had settled deep within my soul. But I would not give in. I would not collapse. I would fight. I would teach them a lesson they would never forget. A mother, no matter how frail she may seem, is not a toy to be played with and then carelessly discarded. There, in the still, quiet darkness of the night, I began to take the first, deliberate steps of my counterattack. The days that followed in that great house became my own private, silent battlefield. My son and his wife, content in their own foolishness, never once dreamed that the senile old mother they thought was fading away was, in secret, observing and collecting every single piece of the truth. I continued to wear the mask of a gravely ill woman, sometimes mumbling to myself, sometimes dozing off in places where they would be sure to find me. But deep inside, my mind was sharper and more vigilant than it had ever been in my life. I began to watch everything around me with a new, heightened awareness. Every morning, Michael would leave for work, and Sarah would go out for shopping or to meet with her friends. That was my window of opportunity. I would slip quietly out of my bed and move through the house, a ghost in my own home. I observed how they lived, how they arranged things. I saw how this house, the one I had spent a lifetime protecting, was now slowly being changed to fit Sarah's every whim. The place where I had heard the workmen was on the first floor, just behind the main living room. One day, I saw that the door to that area had been left slightly ajar, and I made a point to accidentally wander past it. Peeking inside, I could see that the space had been completely gutted. The old walls were torn down, and new electrical wiring snaked across the exposed studs. It was clear they were preparing for a major change, a complete takeover of this house. While they were busy with their project, I also made quick, silent tours of Michael's study and their bedroom. I never touched a thing. I used only my eyes and my memory, recording every detail. I saw new architectural drawings for an interior redesign spread across the desk in the study and notebooks filled with expense records I had never seen before. And then came the most important step. I managed to install a series of secret video and audio recording devices in several strategic locations. I had bought them through an old friend who had worked in the medical industry and was also quite savvy with technology. It took all of my cunning to keep them hidden, to ensure Sarah would never discover them. I placed them in the living room, the dining room, and in a blind spot in the hallway that led to my own room. I wanted to record the conversations they had and the things they did when they thought I was not present, or when they believed I was completely unaware of the world around me. Every night, long after everyone else had fallen asleep, I would quietly get up. With hands that trembled from age and illness, but were steady with purpose, I would retrieve the recording devices and review what had been captured that day. Every image, every sound, was like a knife twisting in my heart. But it was also precious evidence, and it hardened my resolve even further. I heard Sarah talking on the phone with someone. Her voice was full of excitement, talking about how everything was almost complete, about her dream house, and about getting rid of the burden. At one point, I heard her say, "Don't you worry, there's nothing she can do. She's completely out of it, and her condition is only getting worse. It's just a matter of time." Hearing those words sent a chill down my spine. She was using my illness, my very weakness, as a tool for her own gain. Then one evening, the thing I had been dreading the most finally happened. Michael and Sarah were sitting in the living room, directly beneath one of the hidden cameras I had installed. They had no idea that their every word was being recorded. Sarah spoke, her voice dripping with a casual sort of cruelty. "You know, that contract is almost finished. The asset transfer should go through within a few weeks. all we need is for her to be gone, and then everything will be perfect. This whole house will be ours, and we won't have to worry about a thing. We can finally start our new life. It'll be so much easier." Michael just nodded, and I could hear him give a small chuckle. It was a laugh completely empty of guilt or regret. "Yeah, I know," he said. "It has to be this way anyway. Mom is old, and with an illness that serious, lying on my sickbed in my own room." I listened to that recording again through a pair of headphones. Tears streamed down my face, hot and unstoppable. They were not tears of regret for my property, but tears of pain from the deepest betrayal imaginable. The son I had struggled to bring into this world, the son I had dedicated my entire life to raising, was now discussing my death and the blatant theft of my assets as if he were planning a weekend trip. My son's words, "It has to be this way anyway," felt like a blade sinking deep into my already bleeding heart. He spoke of his own mother as if she were a burden to be disposed of, with no emotion, no remorse at all. Even in what they thought were my weakest moments, they continued to talk about the transfer of my assets. They weren't just planning to shove me into a nursing home. They were actively working to legalize their embezzlement of my home. At another point, Sarah said, "I'm already getting things ready to move. This house is so much bigger and more comfortable than the place we're in now anyway." They were talking about moving into my house while I was still alive, while I was still the legal owner. This was more than just greed. It was a brazen insult, a humiliation that I could not and would not accept. My anger was no longer a small spark. It had erupted into a raging fire, burning away every last trace of weak, sentimental feeling. I told myself that I had to be stronger. I would live. I would live to show them that a mother, no matter how frail, no matter how sick, is not a toy to be discarded so easily. They were going to pay for what they had done. That night, I spent hours reviewing all the video and audio recordings. I carefully saved every piece of evidence onto a small USB flash drive. I knew this would be my most powerful weapon. I was not just going to expose their true nature. I was going to make them pay a very high price for this betrayal. I lay there in the familiar comfort of my own bed, but my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all focused on the future. They had no idea what was coming. I would leave them nothing. I refused to let the fruits of my entire life's work fall into the hands of such undeserving, ungrateful people. I would take every measure necessary to protect what was left of my life, and more importantly, to protect my dignity as a mother. I knew the road ahead would be fraught with hardship and pain, but I was ready for it. I had prepared for everything. I would not stop, not for a single moment, until the truth was brought to light and justice was served. After I had gathered more than enough irrefutable evidence, including the video and audio recordings of my son and daughter-in-law's secret conversations and their cruel plans, a cold, hard determination settled in my heart. There was no more room for weakness, no more tears left to cry. All that remained was the tenacious will of a mother who had been pushed into a corner. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my very bones, that it was time to act. A few days later, I told Sarah that I was feeling a little better and wanted to take a short walk in the neighborhood park to get some fresh air. She suspected nothing. She offered a few perfunctory words of caution and let me go. I left the house, but my destination was not the park. I was on my way to take the most critical step in my plan. I was going to see my lawyer. The law office was tucked away on a quiet side street, just as I had hoped it would be. I stepped inside. My heart was pounding in my chest, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of someone about to confront the truth head-on. The attorney, a kind-eyed, middle-aged man with graying hair, greeted me with politeness and respect. I had contacted him beforehand through a referral from an old friend, so he was already aware of the basics of my situation. I sat down across from him, trying my best to keep my voice from trembling as I told him everything that had happened. I started from the very first days after Sarah had married into the family, describing the gradual shift in their attitudes. the terrible diagnosis of my illness, and finally, the heart-shattering words and the secret plot to seize my assets. I spoke clearly, making sure not to omit a single detail, even though every word I uttered felt like a knife gently slicing away the emotional shell I had built around myself. I handed the lawyer the USB drive containing all the evidence I had painstakingly collected, the clear video clips and the undeniable recordings of Michael and Sarah's conversations. The attorney listened intently, nodding from time to time with an expression of understanding and sorrow. When I had finished my story, he looked at me with a gaze full of deep sympathy and a hint of disbelief. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I am so deeply sorry for what you have been through. This is an incredibly painful and complex case, but please rest assured, the evidence you have provided is extremely powerful. We have more than enough legal grounds to protect your rights." After listening to my story and carefully reviewing the evidence, the attorney gave me specific, clear legal advice. I decided to follow his counsel, step by step, to ensure that my plan would unfold exactly as I intended. The first, and most heart-wrenching, step was to withdraw every last penny from our joint savings account. This money was our shared asset, mine and Michael's, and it was the culmination of over 35 years of my life, of my back-breaking work as a dedicated nurse. It was not just money, it was my sweat, my tears, my health, and the very essence of my youth. I had to fight a hard battle with myself to make this decision. Withdrawing the money from the joint account meant severing a crucial financial tie with my son, and it meant taking away a right I had always intended for him to have. But I knew I could not, under any circumstances, allow this money to fall into the hands of those who did not deserve it, those whose greed was so great they were willing to let me die. I had to ask the lawyer to assist me with the transaction at the bank, explaining that my health and age made it impossible for me to handle it on my own. Fortunately, with the attorney's help, the entire process was completed quickly and discreetly. When I held the passbook in my hands, showing a zero balance, I felt a wave of relief that I had protected my assets, but at the same time, my heart ached that I had been forced to take this action against my own son. He had forfeited his own inheritance, losing his chance to receive what I had spent a lifetime saving. Next, with my lawyer's meticulous guidance and assistance, I began the process of rewriting my last will and testament. This was one of the most difficult and heaviest decisions of my life. In my previous will, I had clearly stated that my entire estate, the house, and all my savings would be left to Michael. But now, I had to take the pen in my own hand and strike my son's name from the document. Every stroke of the pen felt like a vice tightening around my heart. I had once dreamed that my son would inherit my property, that he would continue to live a prosperous and happy life in this house, always remembering his mother's love and sacrifice. But now, he had lost it all by his own hand. I could not bring myself to leave my property to a son who had betrayed his mother, and to a daughter-in-law so cruel and greedy that she wished for my death. Instead, I made a decision that I believed would bring far greater meaning to my life's work. After discussing it with my attorney, we drafted the documents to donate my entire estate, the house, the car, and all my remaining savings to a scholarship fund that would bear my name. I had spent my entire life as a nurse, caring for people's health and contributing to society. I wanted the money I had worked so hard to earn, the assets I had built, to be used for a meaningful purpose. I wanted it to help poor but diligent students, to help orphans, to help the future generations of this country. I hoped that it would give them the opportunity to go to school, to study, to realize their dreams, and to become useful members of society, unlike the ones who had abandoned me. This was how I wanted to leave a meaningful legacy, a legacy untainted by greed and betrayal. I have faith that this money will be used for the right purpose, benefiting society and generations to come. The attorney ensured that all the legal procedures were completed swiftly, discreetly, and with the utmost rigor. He walked me through the new will and the legal particulars of the property donation, explaining each clause in meticulous detail. As he spoke, A great weight that I hadn't even realized I was carrying began to lift from my heart. I felt so much lighter. At the very least, I had found a way to shield my life's work from those who were so utterly unworthy of it, and more importantly, I had found a far more noble purpose for everything I had built. After all the legal paperwork was signed, sealed, and finalized, I went back to the task of carefully collecting and organizing all the evidence I had gathered. I spent hours going through every single piece of it, the video clips, the audio recordings, the documents. I methodically transferred every file onto a small, discrete USB stick, the real estate documents for the house, the sales agreements I had found, the bank statements, and, most importantly, the crystal clear footage from the hidden cameras and the damning audio. Recordings of my son and daughter-in-law's conversations. Every video clip, every photograph, every single recording was a piece of the unsparing truth, a powerful and irrefutable indictment of their bottomless greed and their chilling indifference. I made 2 identical copies of that USB stick. One of them, I planned to send to my son, Michael. I wanted to force him to confront the truth, to see with his own eyes what his wife had done, and to finally recognize his own complicity, his own passive cruelty in all of this. I could not bear the thought of him living the rest of his life in a fog of blindness and lies. It was my hope that when he saw this evidence, even if it was far too late, something inside him might finally awaken, that he might finally understand the terrible mistake he had made. The other USB stick, the original, along with the notarized copy of my new will and the official documents for the property donation, was prepared for the court. I wanted the law to intervene. I wanted to reclaim my own justice, to defend my rights as the legal owner of my home, and to ensure that those who had done wrong would be held accountable under the full weight of the law. I knew this would likely be the start of a long and difficult legal battle, but I was ready for it. After all, I had nothing left to lose. I returned to the house, my face arranged into its usual mask of dazed confusion. Sarah had absolutely no idea what I had done. In her mind, I was still just a weak, harmless old woman, incapable of doing anything at all. She was still chattering away, talking freely about their plans to move in and how she wanted to redecorate the house to her own taste. That night, long after everyone else in the house had gone to sleep, I crept silently into the kitchen. I took out a small piece of paper and a pen. Word by word, I wrote down the thoughts that I had been holding in my heart for so long, pouring all of my disappointment, my pain, and my contempt onto the page. I placed that small note on the dining table, right where my son and daughter-in-law ate their breakfast every morning. I wanted them to read these words. I wanted them to understand how I felt, and I wanted them to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was no longer their weak, easily deceived old mother. This is what the note said. There are gifts that money can't buy, treasures that material wealth can never measure. A mother's endless love, her selfless sacrifice, her absolute trust. But some people, they don't deserve so much as an old pair of shoes, let alone an inheritance. Every single word felt like a knife twisting in my own heart, but at the same time, it was a powerful declaration of my freedom. There are gifts that money can't buy. That was the love, the sacrifice, and the trust I had given them so freely, the priceless things they had so carelessly trampled underfoot. But some people, they don't deserve so much as an old pair of shoes, let alone an inheritance. That was my final verdict. My assertion that they had lost everything. Not just the property, but also the love, the respect, and the faith I once had in them. They no longer deserved to receive anything from me. Not even the smallest, most insignificant thing. I set the note down, stared at it for a long moment, then turned and walked away. My heart felt strangely light. I had done everything I could. Now, all that was left to do was wait. Wait for the storm to break, wait for the truth to be revealed, and wait for the day when I could finally reclaim my own justice. I knew, with absolute certainty, that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. My life was turning a new page, stepping into a new chapter. It would be a turbulent one, but I was ready to face it. Because I am a mother, and I will never, ever surrender to betrayal. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The room was still bathed in the soft gray light of dawn, but a strange sense of calm had settled over me. I knew that from this moment on, nothing would be as it was before. I quietly packed a small handbag, putting inside only a few essential changes of clothes and my personal toiletries. I didn't say a word to anyone. I didn't leave another note. I wanted to disappear quietly, like a shadow, leaving my son and his wife alone to face the harsh truth I had left for them. On the dining table, stepping out of the house I had spent a lifetime building and nurturing, my heart felt like it was being torn in two. This home, once my sanctuary, the place where I had raised my son, a place filled with countless memories of joy and sorrow, now felt cold and alien. It was no longer my home. At least, that's what they believed. I took a deep breath of the cool morning air, fighting back the tears that were welling up in my eyes. I turned my back on it all and did not look back. I knew that from now on, I had to walk my own path, independently, without relying on anyone. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I needed time and space to calm my heart, to come to terms with the pain and the sense of loss. I rented a small room in a quiet, unfamiliar suburb, a place where I could live by myself, unburdened by the sad memories of my old home and no longer vulnerable to the false pity in my daughter-in-law's eyes or the crushing indifference of my son. The first week passed in an almost terrifying silence. I lived alone, preparing simple meals for myself, reading books, and sometimes just staring out the window, watching the world go by as I tried to sort through the tangled mess of my thoughts.